Okay. It's a negative commandment that a ritually unclean person is not to enter the camp of the Levim, which means the Temple Mount. If there is among you any man who is not clean, he shall not come within the camp. This comes from Devarim. Okay, the camp of the Levites, which is the Temple Mount. If a defiled person transgresses, went on the Temple Mount, he would violate a prohibition. So I think that might still apply today when they say you shouldn't go up on the Har HaBayit. I know some people do, and I don't want to judge them, but they have righteous intentions. So that's why it's a holy place, a very holy place. Certain individuals from a certain religion kick a soccer ball and run around as if it's like the playground. Okay, I'll go weiter. Okay, next thing. So basically, you can't go there. It was the camp of the Levites. So it applies to you, Damon, and sort of to you, Gavin, being a Levi and a Kohen.
No, I've got a postcard to go anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, can I continue?
Yeah, sure.
And this one is very topical. Now, the next one, actually, what we said last Shabbos, it's a negative commandment not to forget the action of Amalek. And in Devarim it says, remember what Amalek did to you, you shall not forget, which means in the heart it is forbidden not to forget his enmity and hatred towards us. Okay. That's actually...
This is opportune for Purim, man.
Exactly. We said it last Shabbos. Amalek, we don't know who Amalek is. Amalek could have been the Nazis. It's a descendant of Esav, which is the Christian world. I don't know if it's entirely the Christian world, but that's what it is. But we don't know who it is today, who the actual. So you're supposed to wipe out Amalek, but we, as I say, we don't know. There's no clarity on who it may be. Could be even a neo-Nazi. I heard a shit the other day. The guy's a neo-Nazi, white supremacist, or a left-wing anti-Semite. They may not be descendants of Amalek. And anyway, in this day and age, you're not allowed to just go and take someone out. He'll get arrested for murder. It's not like the ancient times where it would have been allowed. And it's not politically correct either.
No, I don't care.
Anything to add to that? And that's actually the end of all the negative commandments. That was actually the last one. The Lord says. So anything to add to that, guys?
Yeah, can we do a siyum on seeing that we finished?
No, we didn't do all of them. It's just we did a selected amount. We didn't do all. There's still some more to do. But then I've got another great book on Shabbos, Malachot of Shabbos, a very nice book. Which is,
that's very good. Yes, I'd appreciate it.
So we can do that with the permission of the Rosh Hashiva, of course. Rosh Hashiva, can we have your permission to do that? The halachas of Shabbos, Malachot. I've got a nice book. And if we want to move on to something else, guys, you must tell me. Okay, so I'm done. Thanks, guys. Okay.
I like that. All right, I'll send you a link now. I like
If you want to know what the book is, this is what the book is called. It's published by Feldheim Publishers.
Okay.
Don't move it. Keep it still, yeah. Can't start book. I must get that.
And you don't remember. In a few months' time, what I've said to you, I might not remember, and I'll go over it again. And it's Chazorah.
Yeah.
So anyway.
We are starting a new Mishnah, which means we're making a wonderful amount of progress. I'm very happy with you guys. All right. And since obviously Arthur has done all the prep and he's prepared this, Arthur, I would like you to read the Mishnah clearly and slowly.
Okay. The Mishnah continues to discuss damage caused by obstacles placed in the public domain. If one pours water in the public domain and another person is damaged by it, the owner of the water is liable to pay for his damage. If one hides a thorn or a shard of glass in a public domain, or if one makes his fence, which abuts the public domain, out of thorns, or if a fence falls into the public domain and other people are damaged by them, therefore by any one of the hazards, the owner of the hazard is liable to pay for the damage.
Okay, good. Art, well read. All right. So listen, I just want to focus on one thing at the moment. We generally discuss the beginning of the Mishnah towards the end, but I want to discuss this issue of a fence that falls in the public domain. Okay? and other people are damaged by them. So this is a discussion that we have had before. And there are two scenarios given in this particular case. The first one is the case where you were your fence was rickety, okay, and you were warned. You were warned that the wall would fall over, and that basically, in that particular case, the owner of the wall was given a certain amount of time by the Beis Din to knock it down or to fix it up so that it wouldn't basically crash on anybody or create an obstruction in the public domain. Okay? But in this particular case, the owner of the wall is liable because of this rickety fence, or we could call it a rickety fence, or we could call it an overhanging wall. But either way, if the Beis Din gave him a certain time and he allowed the deadline to pass, he has to pay for it, since he acted negligibly. And in that case, he's definitely liable for the fact that once the wall falls over, and he's had, apart from the warning, to remove the rickety fence or the slightly overhanging wall, if he leaves it and he had time to clear away the mess of the pieces of the fallen fence, and he didn't do it, he is liable for this, even according to Rav Yochanan, who said he's renounced his ownership of the fence. And certainly, if the fence falls on somebody after the Sanhedrin or the Beis Din gave him a time period in which to clean it, he hadn't done so. Okay. So, the issue is that Rav Yochanan would hold somebody accountable, and everybody else for that matter, would not hold somebody accountable for anybody else that matter, if that it was just a unavoidable accident. In other words, there was no signs that the fence was rickety or that the wall was unstable. That's an unavoidable accident. This is when he's been warned. Okay. Now, we're going to discuss this issue with the Meiri and see what's going on. So let's just go one portion of the Mishnah by its time. So let's discuss the first part. If one pours water in the public domain and another person is damaged by it, then the owner of the water is liable to pay for that damage. Okay. So this is the interesting case. Rav said they did not teach that the owner of the water is liable except where the victim's clothes were soiled by the water. But if the victim himself was harmed, in other words, he slipped on the water and injured himself on the ground, the owner of the water is not liable because it was the ownerless ground that damaged him. Now, we did touch on this issue before, and there is going to be an objection to this. The first thing of it is the distinction is challenged. Rav Huna said to Rav, but surely the damaging surface should be viewed as his mud. The water mixes with the earth on the ground, and the resulting mud belongs to the owner of the water. Hence, he should be liable even if the victim himself is injured on it. So let's just analyze what we're talking about here. I said to you that since we never grew up in a desert, if you know that the Kinneret is the only source of clean water in Israel, I'm talking about a large source, enough for the country, but they've got desalination plants in which they take seawater with modern technology and they get rid of the salt content. In those days, they didn't. So water in a desert is more precious than olive oil or wine. So therefore, we say that the water that he dropped in the pitcher from the daf before in 28a is of value, because in the desert, it's life-saving. How do we know it's life-saving? Because if somebody was taking from your well or their cistern your water that you were going to make sure your animals drank from that water, or you were going to drink from that particular water, and somebody else decided, let me just close, and somebody else decided that they're going to help themselves to the water, and you ask them nice. If you remember, Rav Nachman even said that you could spade them, even if you weren't going to sustain a loss. And even Rabbi Yehuda said, in that particular case, you could spade them if you were going to sustain a loss. So that's how precious water was, and you could take the law in your own hands. So today we could use the example maybe of olive oil or wine. So what is this thing where there's an argument that Rav Huna is saying about the mud? Well, first clue I've got to give you is that Rav does not consider this a case of ownerless water. Why? Because if ownerless water or pit damaged utensils, both Rav and Shmuel would say it doesn't really matter. I mean, Shmuel would say whether it's owned or not, you're not responsible for utensils or the killing of a human being in a pit. And Rav said, if the pit is ownerless, in that particular case, you are definitely not responsible for utensils as the biblical verse. But if that pit or that hazard of yours in the public domain is what you have not relinquished ownership, it is not considered a bore, a pit. It's considered a shore, like an ox. In other words, it's your property. So since that water is precious to you, hang on, Kev, no questions at the moment. Since that water is precious to you, and it's your article, just like if your article or your bull damaged a woman's dress, okay, so too you would pay for a dress, because a dress is considered utility, meaning of use. So the ancient word for utensil was anything that a person would use, not just a kitchen implement. And therefore, Rav cannot consider this a case of a bore, but rather a case of a shore. That's why he's saying that if a woman slipped in and she soiled her dress in muddy water, the owner of the water would be responsible because it's considered like his property, because that water was precious to him. Does that make sense? And then Rav says, but then you're not responsible if the person got injured. You're only responsible. Just hang on, Stephen's about to join us. Stephen? Stephen?
Yes.
Hi, how are you?
Yes.
Good. Nice to see you,
Yeah.
Steve. Good, man. We just I'm just going to put you on mute.
Yeah.
But, thanks for joining us. Okay, guys, let's carry on.
Yeah, when I can. Very seldom. Yeah, thank you.
No problem. No problem. We're going to get started again. So, guys, what we're talking about is now Rav Huna's got an argument. What's the argument that Rav Huna says? Is that, listen, you should pay for damages because the ground is not ownerless. The minute the ground mixes with the water that you consider precious, then that mud has part of the water in it. And therefore, if she slipped in that mud, it's a mixture between what you consider the ground as well as your water, which is precious. And therefore, you cannot distinguish between the ownerless ground and your precious water. Now, all of a sudden, you have to pay for her injury. Does that make sense? Because it's merged. Okay, so Rav's response to Rav Huna is as follows. Do you think that I was speaking of a case where the water had not gone away? In other words, the water was still present, forming a muddy mixture with earth. No, I was speaking of a case where the water had gone away. The water had seeped in the ground without forming mud. So he was saying, listen, I'm not speaking about a case where my precious water mixes with your ownerless, with the ownerless ground. I'm not speaking about a combination, because if I was speaking about a combination and a mix, then the ground itself is not ownerless, because you hold that substance of value that's mixed with the ground. And therefore you are responsible. So he's saying, I'm not speaking about a case where there's water. I'm speaking about a case where the water seeped in the ground and the water had gone away. Now, just one thing to bear in mind, guys. As far as this is concerned, it doesn't mean that all the water seeped into the ground, because then he will have relinquished its ownership. That's according to Tosfot. So Rav is not speaking where, Kev, you with me? Rav is not speaking where all the water got absorbed into the parched earth, because then in that particular case, he wouldn't be responsible for the clothing, because it is water that he owned got absorbed. So the very fact that he's talking about water that damaged her dress means not all of it seeped in the ground, but there wasn't enough, that's according to Tosfot, but there wasn't enough water to mix with the mud. So how are we explaining this? Is we say maybe there's a small patch of water where she slipped, okay?
4:30 p.m.
Gav, is that your laptop talking?
Yeah, but it's every half an hour. It's fine. We'll be finished by the next one.
Fine. So what I'm saying is, so she slipped in this. Most of the water got absorbed in the ground, according to Tosfot. There's a little patch. She slipped in that, and she landed her clothing and soiled her clothing. So in that case, he still owns the water, okay? But at the time, Gavin, that she slipped and made her clothing slightly muddy, Rav is saying to Rav Huna that he's not responsible for the injury, because she cracked her head at the same time on the ownerless ground. Gab, are you with me?
I'm absolutely following.
Okay, in other words, let's discuss the injury aspect and the utility aspect. So she slips on this. There's a big pile of water. Most of it got absorbed, and now there's a little pile. There's not enough that it's a mixture with mud. So according to Rav, she slipped in it, and her dress landed on this, and it swirled her dress. So he's responsible because he hasn't relinquished ownership of the water. But there's not enough water around to have covered all the ground. So if she smashes her head and injures herself, the ground is still ownerless, because it's not mixed with the water, because most of it has seeped away. That's what we're talking about. Okay? Akiva's joining us.
It's not substantial, you mean? Is it not
Yeah, I'm saying her head injured itself in the ground, her dress.
Which was most area, not the little puddle from the amount of water, the quantity of water that was, that didn't get absorbed into the ground.
Kev's hi, how's it?
Good.
All right, listen, you're going to have to watch the odd bit of the share again, but we're happy to have you for whatever part you joined. You always add value, as well as Stephen. Happy to see both of you. So, all right, guys, so that has answered that particular question. So, so now we're on to the next part, where it says, Rav has explained this Mishnah in the same way as the previous one. So now the question is raised. Why do I need two Mishnahs to teach the same point? So let me tell you what this means. In the Mishnah of 28b, right, guys, we learned of your pitcher that causes damage when it shattered and the water, somebody slipped on it at the time. Okay? We just learned about water damage. Now, in this Mishnah in 30a, we're learning about, guess what? Water damage that you're liable for. Kevin, are you awake? So therefore, since we're mentioning about a woman's clothes twice, that you're responsible according to Rav, and that about the injury portion, we're saying, why learn two different Mishnahs to actually deal with the same issue? So there must be a reason. So the difficulty is resolved. One Mishnah refers to the summer season when it is forbidden to pour water into the street. Okay? And one Mishnah refers to the rainy season when this is permitted. I'm going to explain to you what this means now. Okay? So the Mishnah that refers to the rainy season teaches the novel law that even if one poured into the street with permission, he's still liable for any resulting damage. So the Gemara cites a brisa that teaches this point, for it was taught in a brisa with regard to all those sages who said you have permission to cast potentially damaging items in the public domain, namely those who may open up their waste pipes and shovel out their septic tanks into the public domain. Their permit is qualified as follows. During the summer season, they have no permission to do so, but during the raining season, they have permission to do so. And even though they do so with permission during the raining season, if they cause damage, they are liable to pay. So what are we saying is that the Mishnah, one of them that teaches about the water that spilled in the jugs, could be referring to the summer season. And in that case, that teaches us to a different principle, to water that may be developed in the winter season, because you're allowed to distribute your water during the winter season. Why? Okay, the context is as follows. In Eretz Israel, it's not like South Africa. It rains during winter. And in summer season, when it's nice and dry, they never had modern plumbing. So you had a septic tank that for 6 months was taking all your poop and all your waste and everything vile and obviously percolating it like a good cup of coffee with your waste product into a septic tank. Now, if you would have released that in dry summer ground, anybody walking past would have hacked and died from the smell and probably would have got dysentery and vomited. So they said you can't do that in summer. You can only do it in winter, because when it's raining anyway and the rain is washing away the septic tank, then the smell is dissipated and the mess is dissipated. You have to wait those 6 months for when it's the rainy season in order to open up your septic tank. But as Rabbi Cohen once said in the Shir, it doesn't give you permission if somebody got damaged by it. So say, for example, Igoli Gas is doing road works, okay, and they're digging up gas pipes. They have a right to be there by the municipality to dig up the road, but they don't have a right to damage your car. That's what we're learning. You might have permission to do it, but not to damage. So that's what we're learning, and we need the two Mishnahs, the one to teach about the summer season of the water and the one to teach about the winter season with the water. Let's move on quickly. Okay, the Mishnah states, if one hides a thorn, etc., or if one makes his fence out of thorns, he's liable for any damage it may cause. Okay, I'm just sharing my screen because Akiva and Stephen have other obligations and they were not there for the beginning. So I'm just going to read this for them. The Mishnah continues to discuss damage caused by obstacles placed in the public domain. So guys, we've just learned if one pours water in the public domain and another person is damaged by it, the owner of the water is liable to pay for his damage. Now we finished that. Now we're discussing if one hides a thorn or a shard of glass in the public domain, or if one makes his fence which abuts in the public domain out of thorns, or if his fence fell into the public domain and other people are damaged by them. In other words, any of these hazards, the owner of the hazard is liable to pay for the damage. Right. So now that we're on this part of the Mishnah, we're going to say that the Mishnah states that it's going to now qualify about the fence of thorns. So Rav Yochanan said, and we just learned this, guys, in the 29th daf, it's repeating it. They do not teach that the owner of the fence is liable, except where he projected the thorns into the public domain. But if he confined them within his own property, he is not liable. The Gemara explains why is he not liable if he confined the thorns within his own property. Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, said, he is not liable because it is not the way of people to rub themselves against the wall. Meaning that if he hasn't relinquished ownership of the fence, or he has relinquished ownership of the fence of thorns, etc., if you rub yourself against it, or you've got, for example, broken glass within ceramic, and the person's moronic enough to rub themselves against sandpaper or glass or thorns, then for that idiocy, they've got no claim against the owner of that particular fence. Okay? But you are liable if you create it and you've made it within the public domain so it's jutting out. Meaning that if it is a hazard, in other words, it's not against your property anymore, but now you've gone within the pavement area of the public domain and you've got these shards of glass sticking out, then absolutely you're liable for the damage. Why are you not liable within your own property? Well, a very simple reason. And Nimukay Yosef turns around and says, listen, if you've got like a Dobermans, or you've got Rottweilers on your property, or you've got glass on your property, and somebody scales your wall and lands in your property, they're breaking and entering into your premises. So it's not your problem. It's not your problem. They got no permission to be there. So therefore, we know that from this, Rav Yochanan holds you liable for hazards that you create in the public domain, whether it's ownerless, in other words, because it's been involved with injuring the public and it's within the pavement area, or it's part of your fence where it's still owned. Either way, it said you're liable in the public domain. Fine. Now the question arises, why is the Gemara wants to say, the rabbis taught in a brisa, if one hides his thorns or his shards of glass in the wall of his fellow, and the owner of the wall came to demolish his own wall, and he fell into the public domain, and these hazardous objects caused damage there, the one who hid them is liable. Okay, so you've got a situation here is that you've got a person, and I've got a wall up, and Gavin lives next door me, right? And he doesn't want somebody coming into his property, because if they come into my property, they've got easy access into his property. So what he's done is, when I've created a fence, he's the one that put shards of glass and barbed wire and everything on my rickety fence to stop people from breaking in my property and making him more vulnerable as my next door neighbor. So therefore, if that fence fell down and somebody got damaged by the fence itself, I am liable. But if somebody got damaged by the barbed wire or whatever Gavin put up, Gavin is liable. Okay? And so that is in the case. So now Rav Yochanan is going to clarify this ruling. And he said they did not teach the one that hid the objects is liable, except in the case of a rickety wall, which he should have realized is going to be demolished. But in the case of a sturdy wall, which is unlikely to be demolished, the one who hid the objects is not liable, rather the owner of the wall is liable. So let me explain to you Rav Yochanan's point of view. Now, Gavin knows that I made my fence out of solid concrete. So then if he puts, or my fence is sturdy, does that make sense? My wall or my fence. So if he puts an added protection, Rav Yochanan said Gavin's not responsible because the wall is strong, the wall is sturdy. Right. So so then as the owner of the wall, Gavin would not be liable. I would be liable. Why? Because if I decide that I want to demolish my wall, I've got to assume that my next door neighbors might have put something sharp on the wall, or there might be some structural damage. It's up to me to carefully make sure that the wall is removed as the owner of the wall, and not just make sure it's knocked over. Because Gavin built on what my wall was sturdy. But Rav Yochanan said Gavin is responsible for the razor wire fence or thorns or glass if he built it on my wall and my wall is rickety. In other words, the fence is a bit of like, what do you call it, rotten wood and slightly bent over, then Gavin's liable because the likelihood of my wall falling down is high. And then Gavin's responsible if they cut themselves on the barbed wire that he puts up. And I'm responsible for my fence. If my fence, the wooden part, does damage. All right, guys, so that's fairly clear. But now we're going to learn a slightly different ruling from Ravina. So Ravina said this means that if one covers his pit with the lid of his fellow, and the owner of the lid came and took back his lid, the owner of the pit is liable for whatever damage it causes. Okay? Guys, can I repeat this again? I just want to repeat it slowly, Kev. Ravina said it means that if one covers his pit with the lid of his fellow, and the owner of the lid came back and took back his lid, the owner of the pit is liable for whatever damage he caused. And the reason why he's liable is Ravina teaches that although this case is analogous to the Brisa, he basically saying that the owner of the pit would assume that if he kidnapped the lid belonging to his neighbor, okay, and he put it to cover his own manhole, that his neighbor at a certain point would take back the lid. So he's got to, at the end of the day, accept accountability for that fact. Does that make sense, guys? I need feedback.
If somebody falls and down inside the pit with no cover on, it was exposed.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I've got a pit, Kev. I've got a pit. And at the end of the day, I took your manhole from your pit that's in your property, but mine was outside. And I borrowed yours and I stuck it back. And you knew I said, listen, can I borrow your lid or whatever? And I didn't just steal it. And you said, yeah, it's fine or whatever. And you gave me the lid and I put it on my manhole outside. And you come and you take your lid back. I am actually liable for whatever damage it causes. Why? And the reason being is very, very straightforward, is that I shouldn't have been stingy. I should have had the brains to work out that at a certain point, you would take back your lid. Okay? And therefore, I'm responsible for not making correct remedies. Right. Now, let me just give you a response to this 1 second. The Gemara cites a related brisa. The rabbis taught in a brisa that, hang on, before we get there, I need to explain to you one issue, is that Ravina makes a slightly different case here. Why does he make a slightly different case? Is because you might have said in the Bryce's case, the owner of the wall is not liable. Why is he not liable? Because he didn't know who the owner of the thorns was. Gav, I'm surrounded by 4 neighbors. I don't know if it's you or any of the neighbors that put a barbed wire or some sort of fence on my wall. So because I didn't know who to contact to remove the fence, in that case, you might think that I'm not liable. But because I specifically went to Kevin to borrow the manhole, that I wouldn't be liable as the owner of the pit, because Kevin took it back without letting me know that he's taken back the pit cover, and now the pit's now hazardous. So it's Kevin's fault for not informing me and saying, Day, I need my pit cover back. My nephews are coming over. I don't want them to fall in my pit. Can you go to Builder's Warehouse and buy another pit cover? You know, so then it's saying that this case is slightly different, because in that particular case, I know who the owner of the lid is, and Kevin knows who I am, and he should have informed me. Whereas if I've got 4 neighbors and somebody puts glass or brass tacks or something hazardous on my wall, I don't know who to contact, and maybe I can't see that barbed wire, so it's not my fault. So this is the chiddush here of Ravina. So it says that Ravina had to teach us this, especially that the owner of the lid is not liable. Why is the owner of the lid not liable? Because the owner of the wall and the owner of the lid is exempt, not because I wasn't able to contact them or they weren't able to notify me of the hazard. This is according to Rashi. The reason why Kevin is the owner of the lid or Gavin is the owner of the barbed wire is exempt is because you're not responsible for a hazard created by anybody else. Meaning, I'm the one that created the pit. So just because Kevin took back his lid doesn't mean he's responsible. I created the pit in the public domain. Just because Gavin put barbed wire on my fence, or I don't know which neighbor it is, doesn't make Gavin responsible because at that time the wall was sturdy. So there's no reason to think it would have fallen down. So it's my responsibility for having knocked down the wall or not attending to my rickety wall when the Beis Din gave me warning. And therefore, as the owner of the pit and as the owner of the wall, I'm responsible. Okay, that's according to Ravina. There's some people in the Gemara that don't hold like that. What they say is as follows. The rabbis taught in a brisa that devout people of earlier generations would hide their thorns and shards of glass in their field and make a hole for them at least 3 tefachim wide and deep, so that they would not block the plow. What it's saying here is if you're really holding at a level of a tzaddik, you don't create these sort of things. Kevin, because he is a tzaddik, would take back, if he took back the lid of the manhole and said to me, Damon, I need to cover my own pit inside my property. Please go to Builder's Warehouse and buy yourself a pit cover. Kevin will do it because he's a mensch. Okay? So in that particular case, we're saying like the chosed, a chosed and somebody at a righteous level would bury things that could harm other people. Okay? Because you go to extra measures. Right. The Gemara records how other sages disposed of such items. Rav Sheshes would throw them into a fire. Rava would throw them into the Tigris River. In connection with the preceding brisa, the Gemara comments, Rav Yehuda said, one who wishes to be devout should fulfill the words of Tractate Nezikin. Rava said he should fulfill the words of Tractate Avos. And the others say he should fulfill the words of Tractate Brochas. I've got 3 minutes left. Let me just explain to you what they're saying. They're saying if you want to be a chosed and be scrupulous and do more than the letter of the law to protect the fellow man, the reason why Rav Yehuda says you should study the laws of Nezikin is because Nezikin covers all sort of damages of Bava Metzia, Bava Basra, and Bava Kamma that you could cause to your fellow human being. And therefore, if you want to be righteous, don't injure your fellow. Look after his things. Be righteous to him. Rava said you should fulfill the words of Tractate Avos. Why? Because with Pikei Avot, it works on self-mastery. If you perfect your own character, and everybody perfects their own character, you're liable to create a better world. Fine. And then others say you should study Tractate Brochas because that improves your relationship with Hashem. So we see here that these suggestions is that we've got 2 relationships. We've got a relationship with other people. We've got a relationship with our own growth and our own self-mastery and self-discipline. And we've got a relationship with Hashem. And in order to be scrupulous and pious, to concentrate on these 3 aspects in order to act properly. And on this note, we have finished that particular Mishnah. I want to thank you guys very much.